Hello, welcome to the Computer Science Channel. I'm Professor J.T. Baugh. Today we're going to be exploring getting input with the scanner and also looking at arithmetic operations and comments. So first of all, I've got to create another project just to keep everything very organized. So I have everything in the correct directory that I want, the project location. I don't want to create a new main file, but I have to give the project a useful name. So I'm going to call it Java I for 1, and then we're going to call it input and operations. And I'm going to hit finish. So I have an empty source package here, or source packages. I have the empty default package. I'm going to right click this and go to new Java class. This one we'll call operator fun. Okay, so we're going to explore operators and getting input and a bunch of other things. So I do want to make a couple notes about comments first. So comments are ignored by the compiler. For a comment, you can do a single line comment with 2 forward slashes. So I could say something like, my name is John Baugh. And then if I want to do more comments, I have to put 2 more forward slashes. I am teaching you Java. You could also use the multi-line comment. So the other 2 are single line comments, but we could use a multi-line comment which use delimited symbols. So these basically, the 2 forward slashes and the single line comment, they're done as soon as the line is over. If you go to the next line and just start typing, it won't be a comment automatically. A multi-line comment, on the other hand, starts with a /* or /*, which is found using Shift 8 on the keyboard. And then you have */. Anything in here. My name is John Baugh. This is a program that I'm writing. I hope that you enjoy these lessons. Right? So anything that we put in here is considered a comment. So what is a comment? A comment is just, it's usually natural language, English for example. And all we're doing is just leaving ourselves and other developers notes, maybe explaining the purpose of a particular file in total. Or we might be leaving notes for ourselves or explaining how a specific algorithm works, how a specific set of instructions work, or other things like that. So that's how you make comments. So we're good with comments so far. We will be seeing a lot more of those as well. Now, if you'll remember from our last lesson, from the first lesson that we discussed, public class operator fun. So the name of our class is operator fun. That means that since this is the only public class in the file, there can only be one public class in the file, outer class in the file. And we've named the file, or the file gets named operatorfun.java. It has to match the class. In some languages, you don't have to match the class name with the file name, but in Java, you have to. Now, if we want to have an entry point, so I'm going to put a comment here, entry point, main, to make our main method. Do you think you can remember how to make it? If you don't, that's one thing you have to commit to memory, but it'll come with practice though. So public static void main, okay, just those 4 words, then bracket or capital string, brackets, args, and then the open and close curly brace. And I usually put a comment right here to indicate when the end of a method occurs. So right here inside of main, another thing we might want to do is to perform some operations. Some arithmetic operations are the types of operations we're going to start with. So I'm going to say int a equals 5, int b equals 10, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say int result equals a plus b. So if we look carefully at this, we do have already operands or operators such as the assignment operator, and I've introduced now the addition operator. So this right here, the plus sign, just like in regular math, performs addition. You can't go by what you consider general equality operations, because I can say something like a equals a plus 5, and that's never true in a mathematical sense. But that's not what you're doing. You're not doing comparisons or saying this is logically equal to the other thing. That's something completely different, and we'll talk about that later lessons. But what you're doing is you're actually storing a value or a result inside a variable. So in this case, we've got the result of this operation. Okay, it's called an arithmetic operation. In this specific case, it's an addition operation. And we're taking the addition operation, we're taking A and adding it to B, whatever their values are, and that returns the result, and it gets stored in this variable we're naming result. So we need to be really, really specific with our terminology here. Okay, let's focus on these symbols right here. So A is a variable, B is a variable, and then the plus symbol is a special symbol in Java indicating addition in this context. So in general, we say that since it has something to its left and something to its right, we call this type of operator a binary operator, because that indicates two. It has two of these things on either side of it. Now, terminology-wise, again, this is an operator in general. We would say that the things that it operates on are called operands. Okay, so we say operands A and B, operator plus sign, we call that the addition operator. Okay, so terminology, operands and operator. So if something has two operands, it is called a binary operator. So this is a binary operator. So we're getting the result. Let's see if we actually can print out a result here. So if I just say print line result, using our standard output object system.out and the print line method, so that prints whatever we tell it to plus a new line at the end. So we're going to run this by right-clicking, and then we're going to go to Run File, and we can see that it prints out 15, which is what we expect, because 10 plus 5 is 15, in fact. Now, you could also use a combination. So if I said result 2, you could use a combination of variables and literals. So I could say A times 5. Okay, we can do that. So A is a variable. We know that it contains the value 5. But we can also use multiplication symbol, which is the asterisk, times 5. Okay, so we're saying A times 5. So whatever's in A, which just happens to be 5 at this point, we multiply by 5 and we get the result 25. So if I tell it to print out result 2 instead of result, it's going to print out 25. Cool. So that's two of the arithmetic operators that we wanted to know about. What about int result 3? We'll say equals b minus a. So that's the subtraction operator. Okay, over here we'll say it's the multiplication operator. And then we've also got, we'll make another one, int result 4 equals b divided by a. That's the division operator. And then we've got a mysterious little operator we're going to talk about in just a minute, which is the other arithmetic operator. We'll say b, and then this percent sign, a. That's called the modulus or remainder operator. Okay, so whereas the division operator gives you the quotient of a division operation, so when you take b divided by a, what's the quotient? If you take b and divide it by a, and the modulus operator gives you the remainder. Okay, or in number theoretic primitives, you would say the residue, okay, of the operation. Although that sounds dirty, so everyone just says remainder or just the modulus. So, and you might think, well, that probably has limited capabilities, but it's actually very, very powerful. There's many, many different things you can do with it, not the least of which is to tell if, you know, something's divisible by something else, to see if something's even or odd. There's all kinds of things that you can do with it. Maybe I want to print a new line after I start printing a row every 5 items. So I make sure, is it divisible by 5 or 6 or what have you, and then I go to the next line to make things formatted properly. We'll see that this becomes very, very handy as we program into the future. So let's try here. I'm going to do a little bit of copy pasting here. So I'm going to do, let's see, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, and then maybe we'll put 1 back in here. Put that back. Okay. So we can see if I... Oh, we got rid of we didn't have a 1 there. So that's, you'll notice that if there's a variable it doesn't recognize a variable name, it'll underline it. You can even hover over it. It'll say cannot find symbol. So what I did is I immediately looked and said, oh, there's nothing called result1. I just called it result to start with. So a couple solutions. I could just leave this or delete the 1 in front of it, or I could say, okay, I want to actually name it result1. As long as you're not affecting anything else or causing problems, I just did what's called refactoring or changing the code to accommodate what I needed. So I'm going to right click here and then go to run file. And as expected, we have the result of the a plus b yields a 15. The result of the a times 5 yields a 25. The result of the b minus a, so b has 10, a has 5 in it, so that results in a 5. Then you've got a 2, that's the result of b divided by a, so b had 10 in it, a had 5 in it, so 10 divided by 5 is 2. And let's think about the modulus for a second. So the remainder operation, if you divide 10 by 5, which is b divided by a, okay, 10 by 5, you do get a quotient of 2, which we saw just a second ago, but what's the remainder? Well, since it divides it directly and there's no remainder, the remainder is 0. If I have a little more complicated situation, let's say I say int c equals 7, okay, and then I say int mod equals, I just want to show you don't have to name these result 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm just doing this for convenience sake. But if I say int mod equals b modulus c, okay, let's see what it does. So if I say system.out.println, I'll say mod equals, so I'm showing you a little bit of variety here. I'm concatenating a string literal with the result of this modulus operation. So let's see what it does now. You'll notice it says mod equals 3. Well, let's think that through logically why that's the case. If you take b, which is 10, and divide it by c, which is 7, you get a quotient of 1 because 7 fits into 10 one time. But obviously you can't fit it in twice because that would need at least 14. But you can fit it in once, but there is a leftover. So the remainder is 3. That's why modulus returns the remainder, the 3. Okay, so that's pretty interesting. Let's make another file in the same project. I'm going to close this. I'm going to right-click default package and make another Java class. And I'm going to call this input test. Okay, hit finish. I'll delete the extra comments here. We have to make our skeleton program, so public static void main string bracket args. Okay, and just a stylistic point here, you could put this open curly brace on the next line, and you will see a lot of people do that. But usually we try to remain consistent. A lot of people do that. That's called, not surprisingly, next line style. It's also called Altman style, not almond style, or almond style, not almond style, not the nut. It's named after a guy named Eric Almond, or Allman, rather. So you've got me saying the nut's name. And then there's K&R style right here, or same line style. So you've got a space here. Usually, some people don't put the space there, but you have a curly brace. So that's called indentation and curly brace style. So it's K&R style usually, or some variation of K&R style if you do this. Strangely, in Java, I usually do K&R style, and then in some other languages, I do next line style or almond style. So that's really just a preference or what your industry or your particular employer requires, because sometimes they have conventions where they say, well, we want all our code to look the same, so let's make sure we all use almond style, or we all use K&R style or some other style. So that's just a side note. We need to do input. Now, input is not going to be exactly like output. With output, we just said system.out.println. Well, with input, we are going to use system.in, okay, rather than system.out, but it doesn't maybe work the way you think. You can't just say system.in.getInfo or something like that. We're not going to do that. We're going to use a special class called a scanner, and in order to do that, though, it's not built in to what we call the Java language itself. It's in a separate package, okay, or library of items. So we're going to use a special statement, which you'll see tons of these throughout your Java career. You're basically saying, I want to access this, I want to use this package or this class inside this package, so you're going to use an import statement at the top. So I'm going to say import, that's a keyword in Java, java.util for utility type stuff, and then .scanner. Okay, so I'm saying I'm importing java.util.scanner. So this scanner class is what we're actually going to use to get user input from the keyboard. Okay, so it's still console based. We're not doing what's called GUI based, okay, which is graphical user interface, where you have like buttons and things like that, of which NetBeans is actually a good example. We have buttons and we can interact with things with our mouse. That's a graphical user interface. The programs we're writing at this point are just going to be command line interfaces or CLI programs, not GUI or graphical user interface programs. So let's get ready to get input. So I'll say int num1, int num2, and then int result. Okay, so I'm going to prompt the user. So I'm going to ask the user, please enter 2 integers. Okay, and then all I need to do is say num1 equals, oh, I can't do it yet because I don't have a scanner, right? So I need a scanner. So I'm going to create a scanner. Now scanner is obviously not one of the primitives because it's not one of the 8 we mentioned from last week. Can you remember what the 8 primitive data types are in Java? Byte, short, int, long, float, double, char, boolean. Very good. So if it's not one of those, then it's a reference type. Okay, anything that's not a primitive type is a reference type. So we need scanner. We'll call this keyboard because that's what it's representing. Equals, and now here's a keyword we haven't seen yet, new scanner. And then you pass it an argument called system.in. Okay, we really need to pick this apart. When you use a reference type, the string's a little bit unique. We'll get to strings later on, but when you use a reference type, any other reference type you're going to use, you're ultimately, someone's calling the new keyword. A lot of times you see it directly like we do here. So you say scanner keyboard. You are not holding a scanner. Okay, it's not the same as these. With num1, you're holding an integer at that memory location. You're holding an integer at num2. You're holding an integer at result. But with a reference type, remember the distinction between the reference and the primitive types. With a reference type, you're holding a memory address. Okay, so keyboard will not actually hold a scanner. It actually holds a reference to or the memory address of a scanner. So I'm saying scanner keyboard equals new. That reserves memory in a special area called the heap or the free store. And then we create our scanner and we pass it this argument system.in. System.in in this case, just like system.out is the standard output object, system.in is the standard input object, which is normally the keyboard. So we're saying we're creating a scanner with system.in as the source of where the data is coming from. Okay, the input stream. So we're saying we're creating this scanner, and now we can use this scanner named keyboard wherever we want. The new keyword, again, reserves memory on this special area called the heap. It returns a memory address, which is why we can say scanner keyboard equals that, because keyboard will hold the memory address. So now, when we're asked for 2 integers, I can now say num1 equals keyboard dot, and it's an object or an instance of this scanner class, so it has a ton of different methods, just like system.out has print line and printf and print. This particular class allows us to have different options as well. So we've got next int, okay, and then num2 equals keyboard dot next int. And then finally, we're not actually inputting the result, we're calculating the result. So we're going to say result equals num1 plus num2. Now let's print it out. We'll say, make it really nice here, we'll say num1, not in double quotes, and then in double quotes we'll put plus, because we want it to say whatever the user's entered, so it looks like a math problem. It'll say whatever plus whatever equals whatever the result is. So we'll say num1 plus, and then the string literal with a plus in it, num2, then an equals, then the result. Let's pick this apart a little bit. So num1 is a variable, num2 is a variable, and then result is a variable. These are all integer variables. We took in 2 of them. We stored the value of their sum in result. And then you'll notice that we're taking num1, we're concatenating it as a string with this string literal plus. So it'll say, for example, 5 plus 4 equals 9. Okay, that would be one example. Okay, it could be 10 plus 5 equals 15 or whatever, but the plus being printed out is not the same as the plus we're using here. This is printing it out literally as a string literal. Here it's being used as an operator, the concatenation operator, in our code. Now you might think, well, what's the difference between this plus and that plus? You keep using different terms. This plus is doing math. It's doing arithmetic, so we call it, it's a type of arithmetic operator. Specifically, it's the addition operator. When you use even a number, but if you have it quote unquote added to a string, it's actually the concatenation operator because it's contextually different. You can't really add a set of characters to a number. That's not how that works. You just, this gets converted to a string, so it'll say, you know, whatever plus whatever equals, and then the result. So let's see what happens with input test. So it'll prompt us down here. It'll say, please enter 2 integers. I'm going to put 5 space 6 and then hit enter. And we get a result. 5 plus 6 equals 11. That's pretty cool. Let's try it again with different numbers. Let's say 125 plus 250. Oh, I put the plus symbol. So you'll notice it wasn't expecting that. So it tried to read that in as an integer. And then we get what's called a crash, okay, or an exception. We'll talk about exceptions later in the course. That was a boo-boo on my part, but it shows you what you can expect if you kind of goof. Okay, we'll talk about how to handle things like that. So we just need 2 integers. It thought that it could try to convert this to an integer, and it failed miserably, so everything went wrong, and everything went kaboom. So I'm going to do 125 and 250, no plus in between, and now it'll actually calculate them properly. So 125 plus 250 equals 375. So that's pretty awesome. So I want you to experiment with getting input from the user using the keyboard.nextInt. Notice there's also next double. There's, if we can look here, keyboard dot, just to show you, next. There's next big decimal, big integer, boolean, byte, double, float, int. So it's basically got most of what you want. Next line reads in a full string. So if you want to work with strings, then that would be a good thing to use. But other than that, it's got pretty much all the primitives you'd ever want, especially the integer types and the floating point types. It's also got boolean. So you've got anything you'd pretty much ever need here. And then if it's not the format you need, you usually take it in as a string anyway, and then convert it however you want. But I want you to play around with using nextInt, kind of like I did, and maybe write a program asking the user what's your age currently, and then tell them your age in 10 years will be, and then tell them the result. See if you can figure out how to do that. All right, until next time, I'm John Baugh, and I hope you enjoyed this lesson. Thanks, and I'll see you later.